I'm Called Birdy editor Daniel Montgomery here with Called Birdy costume designer Julian Day. Now, the film is set in the 13th century, but it has this modern anachronistic sensibility. Did that free you up to take liberties with the designs of the costumes?
I think I always wanted to base the costumes on actual medieval silhouettes and shapes, and so that was my starting point. I don't think I veered off the actual silhouette, but what I did was having chatted with Lena, who's just she's got great ideas, she's very free creatively, and we always talked about this idea of having a sort of Coachella vibe or a Glastonbury vibe, and we wanted to make it accessible for a modern audience, but still stay true to the ideas of what medieval Britain was about, and make it accessible to a modern audience.
And what kind of research and references did you use in kind of referring to for these designs?
I guess it was a broad spectrum, two different ends of the spectrum, looking at modern day, Glastonbury photographs, but also looking at medieval paintings, which are sometimes not great for reference of costumes. So and I think I looked at one of my biggest influences, actually, which is quite strange, was Japanese fashion design, like Yohji Yamamoto, Comme des Garçons, Izumi. When you look at their shapes, they've sort of created feudal Japanese fashion, samurai fashion, sort of fashion from around the world, from all ages, because you look at fashion from Africa, or North Africa, or these places. It's sort of just very simple silhouettes, but that have maintained. You look at Japanese fashion, it hasn't sort of changed. It's still sort of got medieval styles about it. So I looked at all of these different designers and used them as a sort of springboard for what we were doing.
And what was your approach to the title character, who sort of is in between this world where she is this highborn character, but she sort of fights against being a proper lady?
I mean, I think the thing about Birdy is that she's this free-spirited character, and I think the thing is sort of, and in some ways, a starting point for her was her father, Rollo, who I think didn't really belong where he was. He had to adhere to the social structure that he was born into. He had to be a lord, and I think, ironically, even though he wanted to give her this idea of medieval marriage and things like that, I think he was a man that wasn't able to come to terms with who he was, and I think he passed that on to his daughter, Birdy. So therefore, she took that. She was spirited, and then there was a big, resonance between the two. And I think she took from the fact that he was quite eccentric in his dressing, and I wanted that idea to spring onto her as well. So she obviously had the medieval silhouettes, but she was free, carefree, spirited, and didn't adhere to, let's say, what the medieval daughter should wear. And I think that was my starting point for her, really.
And were there specific fabrics and materials that you used in terms of creating a believable sense of the era, but also kind of comfort for the actors?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, the fabrics at the time were very natural. Wool, linen was very flax, which is obviously linen. Cottons less so. So we tried to source as many sort of original natural fabrics as possible, and they're very easy and accessible to get hold of. And all of her clothes were hand sewn, so and hand embroidered. You know, I think she had 50 looks in the film, and they were pretty much most of them hand sewn and hand embroidered. So we tried to keep it as real as possible, but still have that contemporary vibe. You know, the idea there's a coat she wears, and we found this sort of Indian fabric, and obviously Bella's a vegan, so we used fake wool and fake leather for her. So obviously, and we created this sort of coat for her that sort of was based on an Afghan style coat, but had a sort of resonance when you look at it. It's sort of quite Glastonbury circa 1970. So you know, we you know, Rollo imported lots of fabrics and animals and jewelry from all over the world. You know, that's what he spent his money on, and I think she would have been a byproduct of that and sort of stolen bits of his fabric and remade things from that. So, you know, it was all very naturalistic, very natural fibers, and yeah, so we tried to keep as much as possible to what was around, but then again heightened some of the outfits as well.
And how did you decide on, you know, color palettes, you know, that would work with, you know, each character, you know, particular scenes, you know, just kind of the general mood of the film?
Well, I think at the time when we were shooting, there were a lot of medieval films being made, or fantasy films that used up a lot of the medieval clothes. So all the fancy clothes were taken by all these other productions. So we were left with, you know, essentially what was the dead stock. And along with my assistant, Shida, we went through all the rails of all the costume houses and found a color palette that would suit the film, where all the peasants had a sort of creams and browns, and then we went to the middle classes where there were greens and reds, and then the upper classes had more silks. So by chance, we came across this color design, and I think with Birdie, I wanted her to be bright and vibrant and eclectic in her choices of fabrics and colors. And then obviously we've got Aisling, who I wanted to do, you know, she's the sort of the princess of the film, you know, lots of pinks for her. And Rollo, I just wanted to do, I used a lot of silks for him, and sort of basically I wanted him to look like he was in a Gucci tracksuit for the whole time, but a medieval Gucci tracksuit. So we used a lot of silk for him, and basically he walked around in medieval underwear pretty much the whole of the film, but beautiful medieval underwear with sort of, you know, there's some quite interesting contemporary designers that use sort of different patterns, and I wanted to sort of emulate that. So, you know, it was all a good choice, and an interesting choice. Some put upon us, but we did the best we could, and you know, and made an interesting color palette from what we had.
And you know, then there are, you know, interesting characters like Lord Gideon Sidebottom. He's always in that suit of armor. Tell me about what was it like creating that and having that, you know, sort of element of humor.
Well, I don't think Lord Sidebottom had ever come across. He'd never come back from the Crusades, and I think he just thought he was a warlord. And David Bradley, who's an amazing actor, we fitted, and you know, it's the idea that he's this sort of cantankerous old knight that's never got over, you know, not being a chivalrous knight, and so he sort of always wears his armor, even though he's probably actually never been to battle. But obviously he wants to impress his new young wife, and you know, a virile man, and so yeah, that was fun to do with David. That was great. He's such an amazing actor and game for sort of really you know, any form of costume really. So he's great. I've worked with him a few times. I'm working with him now at the same time. So but yeah, that was fun to do.
Was there a scene in the film that was particularly challenging to design for, like any group scenes or
Mud fight?
Yeah.
the mud fight. I mean, you know, there's not very often you're going to get a mud fight in a film, and it wasn't particularly difficult. And you know what, I think the thing about this film was none of it was difficult, because Lena's such an amazing director, and she lets you have such creative freedom. She lets you get on and do your job. She's an incredible person, and so there was a real family spirit about the film, which I loved, and I had a great team of people. So ultimately, none of it was challenging. It was just a dream to be on. It wasn't the biggest budget in the world, and we had to make interesting, creative choices to get where we were. I wanted to make it as authentic as possible with what we had. The idea, we had a great team of seamstresses and makers, and Debbie, my cutter, was amazing. And we just got on with it. And there's a few scenes that don't appear in the film where there was this big fantasy scene where we had all these costumes made and painted, and it was fun from beginning to end. Really hard work. Obviously, it was during COVID, but at the same time, because there was such a good spirit about the film, I think everybody enjoyed what they were doing.
In your career, you've worked on projects that sort of span eras from, Catherine Called Birdy to, more contemporary things like Rocket Man, Bohemian Rhapsody. Do you have a particular era that you enjoy costuming for the most, or does every project sort of have its own?
You know what? It's about the project. I don't mind what era it's set in. I'm doing something contemporary at the moment. I have no worries about, different eras. I mean, I love doing the 70s. The 70s are great and they're really good fun. But it's more about working with creative directors, a good team of fellow filmmakers. That's, to me, the most important thing, really. I try to do my best on any project with the people around me, really. So, but I do love the 70s.
And designing for original fictional characters versus recreating or creating iconic looks for people like Elton John or Freddie Mercury. Like which would you say is more challenging to do? Is the original or the sort of well-known figures?
It's quite interesting, because the two films, obviously, that I did recently about quite iconic musicians were Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie, and Rocket Man, Elton. And they were sort of so different. We had to do, basically, Elton was free for all. I had to take inspiration from what Elton wore, and Bohemian Rhapsody was more about producing some of the concerts. But, I think that both have their challenges and both are interesting. And I take every job as it comes, and every job on its own merit. And as I say, I'm doing something contemporary at the moment, and we're doing it high fashion. I'm working with Dan Levy, who did Schitt's Creek, and he's an amazing director that has this incredible sense of fashion, has an understanding of fashion. And I've done biopics before, and had to, like I did one about Joy Division, Control. So I think I just think every job you have to take on its own merit and see what happens. I think. I mean, I love doing both Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man. So they were both wonderful projects about wonderful people as well. I think that's the most important thing, really.
And designing such a wide range of projects, do you ever have your designs for your films sort of rub off on your own personal style, that you find something that you love for yourself?
Yeah, I think I tend to not in a overt way, but I think sometimes what I wear rubs off onto the film, and other times what the film rubs off onto me. So there is that sort of bleeding into the film either way, I think, and I think that's good, because I think that it should do. You live and breathe these things. And so I guess that, you know, they both take from each other. I take from the film and the film takes from me. So that's, and I love clothing, and I love all, you know, all kinds of clothing. And I've got a massive collection of clothing that I can, you know, an archive of clothing which I can just dip into and find bits and pieces. So yeah, it's good. I just love clothes. I've always loved clothes, and that's the most important thing. I love clothes.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on Catherine Called Birdy, and I want to thank you for talking with me about it. And you know, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure meeting and talking with you, and thank you very much for speaking to me and talking to me about Catherine Called Birdy.